Have you ever wondered why we lock people away for diseases we can't even see? Not in hospitals, not in prisons, but somewhere in between. Imagine you're a merchant sailing toward one of the richest cities on Earth. After months at sea, you finally see the harbor. Home is right there. You can almost hear the markets, smell fresh bread, and feel solid ground beneath your feet. Then, a guard raises a flag. You're not allowed to enter. Not because anyone on your ship is sick, not because anyone has died, but because someone, somewhere, might be carrying something invisible. So your ship is sent away. 40 days. No explanations, no certainty, just waiting. And here's the strange part. Nobody actually knew if 40 days would work. This is the story of quarantine, and why it reveals something unsettling about human nature. Long before doctors understood bacteria, long before microscopes, long before anyone knew what a virus was, humanity had already invented one of the most powerful weapons against disease: isolation. The year was 1347. Ships began arriving across Europe carrying merchants, silk, spices, and something nobody could see: the Black Death. Within just a few years, it killed somewhere between 30 and 50% of Europe's population. Entire villages disappeared, streets filled with abandoned homes, families went to bed together and only one person woke up. People blamed poisoned air, foreigners, God, witches, even the stars, because when you don't understand what kills you, your imagination fills the gaps. But then, something remarkable happened. The wealthy trading city of Venice faced an impossible decision. Trade made the city rich, ships brought food, money, opportunity, but they also brought death. Closing the ports meant economic collapse. Keeping them open meant risking extinction. There was no good choice, so Venice invented a third one. Ships arriving from suspicious regions would wait offshore before anyone stepped onto land. Not 10 days, not 20, 40. The Italians called it quaranta giorni, 40 days. Over time, quaranta became quarantine. But here's where the story gets even stranger. Why 40? Why not 30 or 50? Surely someone had done experiments, right? Not exactly. The number 40 wasn't chosen because of science, it was chosen because of belief. Across ancient cultures, 40 represented purification and transformation. It rained for 40 days during Noah's flood. Moses spent 40 days on Mount Sinai. Jesus fasted for 40 days in the wilderness. 40 symbolized surviving hardship before beginning again. Medicine and religion weren't separate worlds back then. They overlapped. People believed that if 40 days could cleanse the soul, perhaps it could cleanse disease too. Was it scientifically perfect? No, but surprisingly, it often worked. Not because 40 was magical, but because many infected people either developed symptoms or died before entering the city. Sometimes, faith accidentally stumbled into effective public health. But waiting on a ship wasn't the worst part. This is where everything changed. Cities began building entire islands devoted to isolation. They were called Lazzarettos. Imagine arriving after months at sea. You're exhausted, hungry, terrified. Instead of being welcomed, you're taken to an island surrounded by guards. Merchants, sailors, pilgrims, families, all trapped together. Some were healthy, some were dying. Nobody knew which was which. Letters were smoked over burning herbs. Clothes were washed with vinegar. Cargo was aired for weeks. Sometimes entire shipments were burned, not because anyone knew they were infected, but because nobody wanted to find out the hard way. Disease wasn't the only thing spreading. Fear was becoming contagious too. And fear changes people. When danger is invisible, every stranger begins to look suspicious. Every cough becomes terrifying. Every traveler becomes a potential threat. History has repeated this pattern over and over again. During cholera, smallpox, yellow fever, influenza, SARS, COVID-19. Different diseases, same instinct. Separate first, ask questions later. Because uncertainty is one of the hardest emotions for the human brain to tolerate. Psychologists have found that people fear invisible threats far more than visible ones. A lion gives you something to run from. An unseen infection gives your imagination infinite possibilities. Your brain starts searching for certainty, even when certainty doesn't exist. And that's exactly what quarantine offered. Not perfect protection, control, or at least the feeling of it. But quarantine didn't stop with disease. Look closely at human history. Whenever we encounter something we don't understand, we isolate it. New ideas are censored, foreign cultures are distrusted, people who think differently are pushed away, entire communities become outsiders overnight. It's easier to build walls than to confront uncertainty. That's why the word quarantine has survived for nearly 7 centuries. It began as 40 days at sea. Today, it describes much more than medicine. People quarantine emotions, quarantine memories, quarantine grief. We lock uncomfortable parts of ourselves behind invisible doors, hoping distance will somehow make them disappear. Sometimes it protects us, sometimes it keeps us trapped, because isolation has always been a double-edged sword. It can stop a plague, but it can also stop understanding. The most fascinating part is that the people who invented quarantine never knew about bacteria. They had never heard the word virus. They couldn't see what they were fighting. Yet somehow, by accepting uncertainty, by sacrificing convenience, by waiting, they accidentally discovered one of humanity's greatest defenses against invisible enemies. Not through perfect knowledge, but through humility. There's something strangely beautiful about that. Because the history of quarantine isn't really about disease. It's about the moments when humans admit they don't have all the answers, when we choose patience over certainty, distance over impulse, hope over panic. The plague eventually disappeared, the ports reopened, the ships sailed again, but the word remained, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous things in history were never visible at all. And perhaps the invisible enemy we've always struggled with most was never the disease, it was our fear of the unknown.